Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first steps in starting a small business. My name is Eleanor Chatterton. I am a librarian at the St. Louis Public Library, where we have lots of good books, some neat electronic resources, wonderful space to come in and work, and we've got chairs out, and you are all welcome to come in and sit and hang out as long as you would like, as well as ask questions about where to find information that would be useful in starting or managing a business, maybe how to get started with the state of Missouri and that sort of stuff, or what role intellectual property could play in your business plans. And today we have a program with the St. Louis Small Business Development Center, and our presenter is Amina Abdul Malik. She is a business counselor and specializes in startup services and business plan development. And today she will tell us about the first steps in starting a small business, and I will just turn it right over to her.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, as always, Eleanor. I appreciate you. I know we're planning for future classes for later this year, which I am always excited about. And who knows, maybe some of this training down the line, maybe even in person, so I can see your beautiful, bright faces. But thank you so much for that introduction, and welcome to the Starting a Small Business class today.
I told you what I'm doing.
As Eleanor stated, my name is Amina Abdul Malik, and I am a business development counselor for the St. Louis Small Business Development Center. Now, that was a mouthful, so has anyone, and feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat, has anyone already heard of the Small Business Development Centers already? All righty. So if you have not, and Samantha, I see you posted in the chat that you haven't as well. If you haven't, the Small Business Development Centers are a nationwide support network for entrepreneurs like yourselves who are looking to either start or grow their existing small business. If you've heard of the SBA, which is that federal government entity, the SBDCs are a program facilitated through them. So we help with pretty much anything you can think of that's business related. We assist with things like writing business plans, helping you get access to loan capital if you're trying to get a loan through the bank or get an SBA loan. We even help you come up with new innovative marketing strategies, grow your workforce, or even expand to a new location. If we can't get you the assistance, or if we don't have the expertise that you need, we're also connected to a lot of the other resource centers and areas that you can get assistance here, not only locally and nationwide. So we also have connections and partnerships with a lot of the other support organizations here locally as well. My background has been in business development as well as finance for the last several years. So I genuinely love what I do, and I'm very, very excited to share this information with you all today. Now, before we get started, we have a nice forum here, so I don't want to take up too much time because there's a bunch of information in this presentation today that's going to help you all get started to actually launch your businesses or take the next steps with your business ideas if you already have them. But I would like to hear from you all, maybe if you all wouldn't mind posting this information in the chat, and I'll take a few minutes here to wait. But I would like to know what brought you into the class today, and if you're comfortable sharing what type of business you have, or if you're just kind of still in that planning phase, what your idea is, and maybe even how far along you are. And let's see, how many people are there here? 12 people. Let's see, I'll let you all type it in the chat, and then I will read out just a few of these as we get started, as I'm reading through the agenda here. But I would like to hear from you all and get a better understanding of what you're looking to gain and where you all are in your business journeys. I'll also state one last thing about what we do at the Small Business Development Center. We offer free, or I say no cost to you, counseling one-on-one on a pretty much at your leisure basis. So the SBDC, we do training classes and we also do counseling. I am one of our startup experts in the center, so I typically am always available to help you with a business plan, understanding how to come up with financial projections, even get your business formally registered as an LLC with the state of Missouri, and even on the federal level with getting your employer identification number and things like that as well. And I see Ashley has typed in the chat, welcome Ashley, thank you so much for joining us, and said that she is launching an online group program for performer wellness. You have an LLC already, but you've recently rebranded and would like to better understand your obligations as an LLC. Thank you so much for joining us, Ashley. And I'll tell you right now that one of the benefits of the LLC is that there are not very many LLC obligations from a tax perspective, but we will definitely get into kind of the legal ramifications of having an LLC and what the strengths and weaknesses of those different business models are. And so thank you for that introduction. And I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. If I'm not, feel free to come off mute and correct me. But is it Cecily or Cecily? And you said that you're looking to
Perfect.
start. Oh, go ahead.
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Woo, that's, you know, usually I have to do it 2 or 3 times, but I know with my long name, I'm trying to get better. But you said that you're looking to start a business for shade and blind installation, which let me tell you, when I moved into my last house, I realized how much of a pain that can be. And you're currently doing research to get started with your partners. It's a great place to be. You're going to get a bunch of information that's going to help you make hopefully better decisions in terms of registration and basically just all of your planning. So thank you so much for joining us. And Rosalind says, you want to start a new business as an LLC, and you also need to know how to trademark your logo and business slogan if possible. We'll talk a little bit about intellectual property in this class, the different types, and I'll have some information for you on how to better support your intellectual property. And we'll kind of get into that definitely within this presentation. Thank you, Rosalind. Samantha, hello, hello. Hi, you say you are in the planning stages of a real estate investment company. What brought you here is funding and mentors. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Real estate investment is always it can always be a very, very profitable business if it's set up with the right partners and team involved and the right structure. So thank you so much for joining us. All righty, and I see, thank you so much for joining us, Gohile, and thank you for putting the pronunciation in there for me. And you are starting a resale vintage online boutique and currently doing more research on what you need, licenses, and whether an LLC is better for you. We'll definitely get into the ramifications of protecting yourself and your business by adding that legal, making it a legal entity. And so I'm definitely already probably going to recommend and say that the LLC is good for you, but we will talk about why that is here as a part of this presentation. So thank you for that introduction. As you all may be still typing in the chat, let's get into the agenda and what we're going to learn about today. Today, we have a wealth of information in this presentation, so I'm going to try to jam-pack that into about an hour and a half or so, but we are going to start with understanding what goes into the decision of business ownership. Before you can start planning your business, you really need to make the decision and understand who business ownership is right for and what some of the risks are with owning your own business, which I'm sure that some of you all are already aware of during your practice. And Gifty, hello Gifty, you are in the very early stages of starting a hair care line. You are here to gather as much information as possible. Thank you so much for joining us. And I've recently gotten more passionate about the products that I'm using in my hair, so maybe interested to hear what you are developing over there as well. After we talk about the decision of business ownership, we are going to dive right into probably one of the most important steps in this agenda, which is the planning stage. How to get started planning. What are some of the things you need to know as you are creating your business plan? Then we're going to talk about how you fund your plan, the different sources of funding typically for a small business and some of the more atypical funding methods. We're also going to talk about the different legal structures of business and how you go about selecting a structure and why. Then we'll talk about what goes into choosing a name, how to register your business on the different levels, locally, on the state level and federally. We'll talk a little bit about taking care of yourself with taxes, how to cover and protect yourself and your small business in step 8. We'll also talk about the different types of licensing, and then we'll wrap everything up with how to get started out strong and take all of this information back into your business on a tangible level and actually get started. So, and before we dive into step one, I have someone else introducing themselves. Thank you so much, Sal. And you are looking to step out, or you're looking to step into the food industry, excuse me, by starting a restaurant. And as much as the legal and taxation requirements will be very, very helpful to you. So thank you so much, Sal. And a restaurant is, I'll admit, one of the more challenging or sometimes can be one of the more complex small business operations to get started, but also can be very, very valuable to the community and can in some ways be profitable if structured correctly. So we'll definitely get into that legal, some of that legal information. Mariah, thank you for joining us. Hey there. You are beginning as a freelance proofreader and copy editor and would like to get a better idea of how to organize general business aspects. Thank you so much for joining us as well. Okay, as we get started, as people are still typing, we'll kind of jump into the first step here into the presentation, but I'll still come back to the chat and read some of these introductions as well. And I am very informal during the class, so at the end of a slide, if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourselves, join in the conversation. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know either via chat or via voice as well. So all of you all have already somewhat started to make the decision of if business ownership is right for you. But when you're starting and thinking about your small business, you want to start by asking yourself what role the business is going to play in your everyday life, your life in the long term, and what is really in it for you when it relates to owning a small business. What are some of the reasons why you want to start up your own business? A lot of times I hear, and you all can feel free to type in the chat or shout out some answers, what are some of the reasons why you want to start up your own business? I know that I frequently hear from clients that they're starting their own business typically because you found you have a skill or you see a need out there in the world that needs to be solved. And then I also sometimes hear that people are looking for more freedom, more time with their family, wanting to make more of their own decisions. A lot of those are good reasons why you would want to start up your own business. But you want to really understand the deeper value and the deeper reasoning that you are going into small business ownership. Ashley says that one of her reasons is her health. Her health doesn't allow her to work a typical 9 to 5. So she needs that scheduling flexibility. And then being able to work remotely while traveling is also a bonus for you, Ashley. And that makes a lot of sense. Rosalind says that she wants to start her own business to control her schedule and her income, and also to help the community. All of these reasons are very, very common for people who are wanting to start their own business. There's no right or wrong answer to this. But there are a lot of misconceptions that people do have about small business ownership. One of those is that people think they're sometimes going to be able somehow to work less than they did before working that 9 to 5 and have more free time because they're their own boss. And simply put, that's typically not very true. Working your own or owning your own business, often you have to work more hours than longer to be successful, because at that 9 to 5, you are able to clock out or clock in. You're able to do and work on only a specific type of task, hopefully something that you're good at. But when you're a small business owner, you will have that flexibility, Ashley. You will be able to control your schedule and your income, Rosalind. So those are great reasons, but you do want to be aware that business ownership takes a lot of time and a lot more effort and requires you to wear typically several different hats at one time. So you may not have a boss telling you what to do, but now you have customers, you have the bankers, you have suppliers, or any of your other stakeholders that are still going to be impactful to the decisions you make related to your small business. Let's take a look at some statistics here. And these statistics actually are dated by just a few years, but still very relevant. But small business makes up about 99.9% of US firms. Okay, so the majority of our businesses here are small businesses here in the United States. But there are a lot of risk with those small businesses, as we can see. There are still more small businesses that are opening than closing, and this was before COVID information, so I'm going to have to update this now for with new information related to that. But when this was written, 20% of businesses with employees actually fail within the first year of business. Only half of the businesses, small businesses that start, even make it past year 5. A little bit under half of small businesses, at 42%, fail because there is no market. And 29% of small businesses startups fail because they run out of cash. And you may think, how are you running out of cash? How did you not plan for that? How were you as the business owner not prepared with the amount of money you need? And there's a lot of reasons for that. But small business is very, 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 very risky. And you may be wondering, why is there such a high failure rate or closure rate? And Ronald, you have a question here. What defines a small business? There are actually several definitions for what a small business is. And from a legal perspective, the Small Business Administration, the federal government, actually has a calculator for dictating what if your business is small. So it depends on the industry you're in. It depends on where you're located. But typically, a small business has a certain level of employees, which I won't quote you right now because it's very dependent on the industry. But a small business is also, it typically is defined by the amount of employees and also the amount of revenue per year. Those are typically the two ways that you would define a small business. And I can share with you the actual link to the calculator for that, or the chart that shows the guidelines on what a small business is directly from the SBA. But why do these small businesses have such a high failure rate, these startups? So all of these reasons here on this slide are very, very relevant and are some of the top reasons and the most common reasons why startups fail. Poor location, unexpected growth, using your business funds for personal uses, having inadequate records or a lack of financial knowledge, even sometimes that lack of experience or that inefficient capital or not having enough money. All of the reasons on this slide could be mitigated or eliminated by the number one reason on this slide, inadequate front-end planning. So all of these, everything that you do, everything related to your business development and starting your small business is related to planning. The more you plan, the better prepared you are for changes within that plan. So everything you do now will guide you into the future when it comes to planning for your small business. So let's talk a little bit about what goes into that plan. We also, I know Eleanor and I are actually working on planning for upcoming classes, and she'll let you all know about what we may have upcoming at the end of the course, but I know that we are hoping to do a business plan development class, and that will really be a follow-up to this and kind of guide you all through the different components of a business plan and get you started and provide you with actually a template to actually get one of those created with financial projections as well. So the first step in the planning phase is self-evaluation. You can't design a product or service without understanding what your strengths or weaknesses are. So the SBA actually has a checklist on its website that I will also be sharing with you. And another resource that you're going to get after this class will be a comprehensive startup toolkit guide that we have created for the state of Missouri here. It's about 45 pages or so, and it guides you through everything that we're kind of discussing within this presentation, all the different steps you need to take to get your business started. So I'll be able to provide you all that toolkit as a resource after class. But you start with self-analysis. If you identify something that you believe you'll need for your business that you don't possess, that's fine. Now is the time for you to start determining how you will either obtain that skill that you need, or either by learning that skill or either by outsourcing and hiring someone that is well equipped with that skill that you need. The self-analysis step will also help you carefully analyze your own, the characteristics that you have, the skills that you have, and the experience that you possess. So these are the things that are going to be your strengths as you're starting this new business. And finally, that self-analysis is going to help you determine if your business idea is even feasible. So if you're going through that self-analysis stage and a lot of your business is defined on doing math and not working with customers, and most of your strengths are in soft skills, customer management, and customer service, then you may want to change that business idea to mold it better to your personal strengths and weaknesses. After you complete a self-analysis, you're able to then look at the market you are going into. You can do this in several different ways with several different tools, tools that you may get access to through a small business development center. We have something called a business model canvas that I use with clients. And the business model canvas allows you to test your business model from a graphic visual perspective by creating a hypothesis that can be tested before you invest the time and effort to create a full detailed business plan. So the business model canvas separates your business into 9 separate categories, and each of those categories represent a building block in the creation of the new business. So we would work through each category together until we developed a model that illustrates kind of a cause and effect between all of your different 9 business functions. But there are several different ways to do a market analysis, and ultimately you are trying to research all of the different aspects of your business to gather the data, the information and facts you need to validate your hypothesis from the beginning here, from that market analysis. We're going to talk a little bit also about the different startup costs that should be included in your planning, and also how you're going to be managing cash flow, and also where the funding for your business is going to come from. So all of these steps are going to be instrumental as you are doing your business evaluation. One of the best ways, and I'd say most impactful tools for you all as startup business owners, is the business plan. And in my 4 years, or is it almost 4 years now, maybe going on 5 that I've been with the organization, I've seen countless business plan templates. Have any of you all seen or already completed or worked on a business plan already for your business? Okay. And what a business plan is, if you have not already completed a business plan or worked on one in a capacity for your business, a business plan is like a living, breathing roadmap for your organization. It explains everything from the reason why you started the company to how the company is going to be organized operationally, to how your company is going to sell its items. Even the business plan even describes who you're going to be selling those items to. I've seen so many different outlines for business plans, but every different outline is going to have and address the 4 basic topics that are shown on this slide. Number 1 is going to be the business description. You may see these terms described differently depending on which business plan template you're using. So they may not call it a business description, they may call it the opportunity section. But the business description is where you're going to detail your hypothesis. Some of what is included in this section includes the legal structure of the business. Is it an LLC, a sole proprietorship, a corporation? This section also describes what you're offering, what products or services you actually are going to sell. It also describes what your value proposition is, and your value proposition is what is your promise to your customers in terms of what you're going to provide. And then it'll also describe in this section why your business will be profitable both in the near term as well as the long term. So the rest of your plan and everything else in your plan is going to be trying to prove that you can achieve your hypothesis in this business description. Another key section of any business plan is going to be the marketing customer section. Here is where you are going to be reviewing and analyzing the entirety of your industry and your market, which we'll be discussing shortly. And the key in this section is something extremely important in your planning process and in this marketing customer segment of the business plan is going to be understanding and identifying your target customer segment. I say this pretty much every class. Eleanor is probably sick of hearing this phrase, but I always tell my clients that you can sell to anybody, but you cannot target everybody. That does not mean that you won't sell to other customers that you're not targeting, but the better you understand who your ideal customers are and what is important to them, then it becomes a lot easier to communicate with them via marketing and then also to sell to them. So within this marketing customer section, you're going to describe who your target customer segments are. And then also within this section, you'll be letting the reader know that your business is the best solution to their problem. And you'll be able to describe that here, why you feel like your business is the best solution to those particular customers' problems. And then also in the business plan, you're always going to have sections where you describe the operations, the management, and organizational structure of your company. Now, this section typically explains and describes how you will control and influence what happens in the business, how the business will do the work necessary to deliver on your value proposition, and also accomplish all of its other tasks. So a few of the topics that are addressed in the operations and organization sections include your actual personal background, your business experience, and the key individuals that you're hoping to rely on as you help run the business. So what are those key roles going to be within your organization? How will the operations work? And who is going to do some of those key parts of the operations? When I say who, you don't necessarily have to know their names, but we're looking for you to understand what these roles are going to be before your business grows to that step, if that makes sense. And then finally, another very, very important part of the business plan, especially if you are hoping to receive some type of formal business lending for your business to help, is the financial section. The financials gets to the nitty gritty and explains where those dollars and cents are going to come from to support you starting this small business. It also is going to describe in this section not only where the money is going to come from to start the business, how you are going to support those startup costs and support the operations of the business with revenue. Where is the revenue going to come from? What are the different revenue streams within the company? And also the financial section will include pro forma statements or financial projections. You may have heard both terms used. They can be used interchangeably. So if you hear pro forma statements, that's basically the same thing as a financial projection. So your projections are going to include something called a profit and loss statement, which shows you as the business owner how much a company made and how much a company spent. And then also the balance sheet, which shows how much your company owns and how much your company owes in liabilities, as well as finally the cash flow statement. Now, the cash flow statement is very, very important for the banks or any lender because the cash flow statement shows you how much cash or liquid assets a company has at the beginning of a period and the end of a period. So basically on a month-to-month basis, how much cash does your business have on hand? So those three statements, as well as explanation of your startup costs and their uses, is what is going to belong in the financial section of your business plan. Any questions about the business plan? All righty. So now that you have an understanding of what belongs in your business plan, now you can get started with some market research and actually start to find information about these potential customers, these potential suppliers, and these potential competitors even. So there are three main topics that you want to research when you're getting started. Eleanor has already mentioned some of the resources they have to aid in your market research, but you want to start from a top-down level when you're thinking about market research. So when you're thinking about an industry versus a market, an industry typically exists to serve a market. If an industry becomes irrelevant to market demands, it fails. So an example of an industry is something, let's say the music industry, for instance. The music recording industry typically had most of its market share coming from full-length album sales and traditional record labels. So the music industry had a makeup and had different markets within that music industry. Now that the music industry is changing and we are changing the way that we ingest music and other types of entertainment, the markets that are underneath that music industry have less and less record labels and more management companies and more distribution companies. So the markets that are within that industry have changed. But you start off by analyzing what is going on with the industry that you are going into. Even if you are an online business, you still have an industry and market that you are joining. And you can decide this by thinking about your target customer segments as well. What are key trends within the industry that you're going into? How are customers or how are things changing within the industry? Are there changes being made to the way that this industry is supplied or customers' taste or habits? Then you're able to do the same kind of research for the actual market that you're going into. How large is the market, even if it's online? Are there enough people in your market for you to consistently sell to? Also, then finally, you can take a look at and analyze your competitors. Competitors are anyone that is solving the same problem you are with either a similar solution or even a vastly different solution. Your competitors are not just your direct competitors that have the exact same solution as you. And that's going to be one of your main areas of competition or your main things to understand when you're thinking about competition. When you're thinking about competition, you should think about it first from the perspective of your customers and your ideal customers. Who is solving the same, or how are your customers getting their problem solved? Whether that be with another solution or maybe not even realizing that they have a problem at all. So understanding your competition starts with understanding what problems your customers need solved and doesn't really start with analyzing all of those direct competitors. Although you do want to have an understanding of who is doing obviously the exact same things as you or something similar as well. Going a little bit further into market research, there are two main different types of immediate segmentation that you do when you are thinking about market research. The first way to start to segment a market and understand who your ideal customers may be and start to segment your market is using demographics. Demographics is essentially the who of your customers, their basic traits and information that they have. So ultimately, to understand your customers, you want to understand first what's going on in your market area, even those things that you can't directly control. And you also want to understand if there are any specific economic conditions or changes or any political conditions or social conditions that may be relative to your customers and how they may interact with your product or service. Does anyone already know what demographics are or even psychographics? And feel free to unmute as well or type in the chat. And I see Sal sent a message and asked, will we be sharing the recording of this session? Yes, we will. It will actually be a link that's sent out to everyone, I believe. after the recording is rendered and posted. So yes, you will definitely get a recording as well as a few other resources after the class conclusion. Okay, so if we haven't heard of demographics already, demographics are the subsets of a target market segment that share particular attributes. So these different traits can be things such as age, a customer's sex, their family status, their education level, their income, their occupation, and even their race. So your demographic information are those base level traits of a person that typically aren't changed immediately and that just exist within that person there. The psychographic traits compound on the demographics. Psychographic information goes deeper into the mentality and the buying patterns of your potential customers. So psychographic information includes your buyer's habits, their values, why their spending habits, their hobbies, and even just their life values. So demographics explain the who behind your buyer and who your buyer is, and psychographics explain the why behind they buy. Demographic information is the dry facts before you can get a deeper understanding of your customers. But those are going to be the two main types of segmenting that you start with when you're trying to better determine who your ideal customers are. And to follow and finalize and kind of wrap up the market research section here, these are 7 good questions that you can ask about your customers to try to make sure that they represent a quality customer segment. So as you're researching your customer focus or researching your customers and trying to understand who the most attractive segments of customers are going to be, you can ask yourself these questions to kind of get a better understanding of the quality there in that segment. So when we look at the questions, who are they? Who are the customers? How many customers are there? How much do they spend? And how often do they spend? Those first 4 questions there are going to help you identify the potential business that already exists in your market area. And these first 4 questions are going to kind of be the basis for developing some of your sales projections and understanding how many of these potential customers your business is going to need to serve. The last 3 questions, and one of these is cut off here by my graphics, I apologize. How do they make purchasing decisions? What do they value? And finally, what or even who influences them? I often think about or bring up the example of a toy company. A toy company obviously sells toys for children. However, their target customer is not always going to be that child. A part of their one of their target customer segments is the parent. So they have to get a better understanding of what influenced the parents to buy that toy for that child, as well as have an understanding of the child themselves. So when you're thinking about customers, understand that there is a lot of different things that goes into a buying decision. And we know that because we're all consumers ourselves. The last 3 questions on this slide are going to provide you the knowledge you need to create a strong value proposition that is going to be the most meaningful to your customer and makes your solution to their problem the best. And that's what you're looking for your solution or value proposition to be the best solution to that customer's problem, or create a unique solution to that customer's problem. And these are also topics that we will dive into a little bit deeper when we do a business planning session as well. And before I move on to the funding section of the presentation, did anyone have any questions so far or any comments? All righty, we'll keep it going. So next we're going to talk about what it takes to fund your plan. And I say that this step it could be placed several different places in this presentation. Some might suggest that the funding could be later in the sequence here, but the reason why we put funding here and address it right here in the middle of the presentation is because if you're not able to self-fund your business or go through that planning or understand what it's going to take to get funding, then you're not going to be able to move forward. So we want you to have a good understanding of the sources of funds, what you'll need to get started in order to properly plan for your business development. So the first part of your funding that's going to be needed is understanding all of the things that it's going to take to actually open the doors of your business, and that is your startup costs. So your startup costs are all of the expenses associated with getting the doors open and beginning your operations. So when you're thinking and considering your startup costs, I tell my clients you want to go item by item. If you are an online business, that means including all of the money it's going to take to purchase any website hosting or get a certification that you need if you are providing a service, or purchase a stapler if you're renting an office space. Every cent and dollars that you are planning to spend to get this business up and running should be included in your startup costs. And a good example of this is the doctor's office. When you think about startup costs for that doctor's office, you may start thinking about an X-ray machine or an MRI machine. You may not think about that printer or the office furniture, but the more detailed you are in planning and accounting for your startup costs, the easier it is when it comes to actually launch the business. And when we go back to that slide that said how high of a percentage of startups fail due to a lack of cash, this is one of the reasons why, not adequately accounting for all of your startup costs. So some types of startup costs that you typically see are going to be those legal and professional services, anything that you paid for to get that business registered or launched, a utility deposit or insurance deposit. If you are purchasing initial inventory, that is a part of your startup costs. Obviously, any furniture or fixtures, any equipment, and even any software or electronics that you end up purchasing. All of this is included in your startup cost list. So after you calculate your startup costs, we want to add in your initial operating expenses. So as a new business owner, you're also going to be considering all of those reoccurring expenses that must be covered, no matter if your business has a sale or not. So expenses are things that aren't directly related to the amount of sales or revenue that your company has. This typically includes things like rent, if you have any employees, which I'm going to hopefully recommend that you do not unless you are opening up a retail brick and mortar operation. Also any insurance that you are estimated to pay, and even any utilities. When you are calculating operating expenses, I actually use a spreadsheet with my clients that we use kind of across the state. But when you're calculating your initial operating expense number for this equation, I recommend using 2 or 3 months of your initial operating expense number. Really, 2 is a good number to kind of start with, to have an understanding of how much you're going to need to cover 2 months of business. And this is no matter if the company has its first sale or not. So far, we add up our startup costs, our initial operating expenses, and then we also add into this your working capital. So your working capital is something, and this trips up a lot of startup owners, and the working capital is the cash you need on hand to cover any of those expenses that are associated just with the day-to-day of doing business with your customers. Now, this does have a lot of overlap with initial operating expenses. Typically, I typically do not blend. I typically don't blend the working capital with initial operating expenses, but it is totally okay to blend both of these into a single category. But you have to make sure that you're not forgetting about the working capital as well as those operating expenses. So when you're anticipating working capital, it's good to have to estimate for about 6 months of cash on hand to cover both those initial operating expenses that I mentioned, as well as that working capital. So I say when you are calculating your initial operating expenses number, you start off with just a couple months, but when it's all said and done, that total number for working capital and initial operating expenses should be enough to cover at least about 3 months of both. So a good set of financial projections will help you kind of provide a starting point for determining how much cash you're actually going to need. Within working capital includes things like accounts receivable. For any of you all who are going into the service-based industry where you're providing a service, or even if you're providing a product and you're getting paid at a later date and invoicing your customers, please be careful and aware of the impact of accounts receivable to your working capital. Accounts receivable is where on your financial statements, any money that you are expected to receive in 30 days or less sits. So if you bill your customers at the end of every month, they have 30 days to pay, you haven't received payment from a couple customers and you only have 10 total, and the 2 customers that haven't paid you in 30 days are 2 of your larger customers. What happens the next month when you're still waiting on the payment from those 2 customers, but need to go out and purchase inventory or supplies to start a project for a new customer while you're waiting on that payment? So keeping your accounts receivable up to date and making sure that you're collecting payments promptly is very, very important to make sure that it doesn't interrupt your cash flow for your business. Inventory is also a part of working capital. If you're selling something, you need to make sure you have enough cash to cover the amount of potential inventory you may need to purchase within that period. And same thing with payroll, which I'm hoping many of you all will not have payroll in the beginning stages, but you definitely have to have enough money to cover any wages that you expect to pay your employees. And then we already kind of talked about those operating expenses, and you even want to put a little bit of money aside for any type of special taxes. And then finally, the last part of this equation and things you will need to calculate and get together for funding your plan is emergency funds. And we all know, and we've been here before just as regular human beings, that unforeseen things happen. We have circumstances where things happen that we may not be able to control. Let's say if your business uses transportation to get around, or if you are a delivery service, a gas price hike could be very, very problematic for your company. Or even if the furnace goes out at your place of business, or one of your pieces of equipment goes down that you weren't expecting to give out. All of these emergencies should be accounted for with emergency funds. And most startups, believe it or not, don't include emergency funds in their planning or their funding requests. So what happens is people develop their financial projections and have a certain amount of money in mind that they're going to request without emergency funds. Then they have an emergency a year in, 2 years in, and then they're back at the bank, and the lender is then nervous when you come back to them for more money once they've already made the loan. So it's better to account for a little bit of emergency funds money in the beginning if you're going up for a loan, so that you're not circling back and coming back to that same lender. And also, one thing to note, for a startup, emergency funds can't be a fixed asset. Okay, so if you are looking for emergency funds for your business, if you are just in the startup stage, your emergency funds need to be something very, very liquid. So it needs to be either cash or a very, very liquid asset. Does anyone already know what a liquid asset is? A liquid asset is something that you own or the business owns that can quickly and easily be converted to cash with little to no loss in value. So when you hear the term liquidity, that essentially means how quick can that asset be turned into cash. So when we think about simple types of payment, a good example is cash, credit, and a check. So a check is obviously going to be the least liquid. You have to cash that check, wait for both banks to go through their process, and then you receive those funds. A credit card is instant, but it could be a little bit, it may lose a little bit of value depending on what type of credit card fees the company takes. And then obviously cash is direct, it's liquid. As soon as you receive it in hand, it's usable, spendable at its same value. So when you're thinking about your emergency funds and just planning for your finances for your business in general, you want to make sure that you have enough liquid assets and cash to back up any fixed assets like equipment, or if you're purchasing a building or things like that. And so here is just a summary of the different types of funds that you are going to calculate to get that total amount that you need to start your small business. So the actual amount that you need is the sum of all four of these. And the more you plan, the better you will be. Poor planning often results in you not having enough funds to make it through your early years, where it's instrumental that you have that financial support, especially when you may be going through a time initially where you're not always immediately profitable in the first year of business. And that's essentially why a lot of that lack of planning is why 29% of startups fail due to that lack of cash. Now let's talk about sources of funds. This is where it gets fun. I get a lot of questions about funding small businesses. And to be frank with you, funding for your small business typically comes in two forms, either debt or equity. Debt is obtained typically by borrowing and is typically going to be repaid from the cash flow of the business. And equity financing is contributed by someone who owns the bit or has ownership in the business, or some type of investor that is not repaid from the operations and is repaid directly from the owner of the company who received that funding. So when we think about funding for your small business, typically you yourself is going to be the first source of funding. Your savings, your money. I'm sure that many of you all have already put some type of money into your small business, and you can share with me if that's the case in the chat. Have you all already started to put some type of dollar and cent to your idea? And if you haven't, that's also great as well, because hopefully you're getting some information that will help you make some better decisions with where you need to spend some of your money when you're thinking about planning. But obviously, you as the startup owner typically are going to be the first person to put money into this startup. Then you can think about your friends and family. Now, this is a potential equity source. You know, friends and family, when they hear you have a good idea, a lot of times they are inclined to want to assist. Now, typically, sometimes when you get this money, it's loaned to you at no interest or little interest at all. But if the money is coming in the form of a loan to you, even if it's from a friend or family member, it is very, very wise to state the terms in writing. If the money is still in the form of a gift, it's still wise to obtain a letter to that effect from the donor. In fact, if you get some money from a friend or family member that's donated, and then you still need a little bit of money from the bank for a loan, they're probably going to ask you to see those letters to better understand how you came up with some of those funds. Debt financing, those sources are usually from banks, even economic development corporations, or even government agencies. But in order to obtain a bank loan, what any bank is going to want to see is a feasible business plan that shows the reader that the business can be and will be successful. But also the lender is going to take a look at your personal background, The lender will also look at your financial projections to make sure that the finances make sense. So when you're thinking about going and getting a bank loan, you're going to prepare yourself and your financial background as well as the business's finances and their background. So the bank will look at everything when it makes a decision. Other funding sources can include private investors that either want an equity or ownership position in your company, or either want you to pay back debt traditionally. Crowdfunding, which typically expects some type of payback. Crowdfunding is where you get several different people to invest in your company. Even supplier credit, home refinance, life insurance policies. These are all different sources that we typically do not recommend. And then we finally have grants. Oh, how many times do I hear about grants? And I get people that are under the impression that grants are just out here very, very freely. And there are a lot of different grants that exist for a lot of different sources. But grant funding, I will be honest with you all, is very, very seldom a consistent source of funding for a for-profit small business. And in my years of working with clients and my colleagues' years of working with them, I haven't seen a traditional small business awarded a grant. But that does not mean that I'm saying don't go after grants, but just understand that grants a lot of times are considered free money, and that's simply not the case. Each grant will come with a set of different guidelines and expectations. Some grants are have easier reporting than others, but most of the time with grants, you have to use that money for a very, very specific purpose, which is usually something involved with the community or bettering society as a whole. And there is expectations for results or outcomes related to grants that you are going to be held to in terms of reporting and coming up with those metrics and that data. So oftentimes, and I've heard my boss say this, there'll be grants that we could have had access to, but sometimes the paperwork is not even worth the time and the little bit of money that you receive. So grants are out there, but typically you as a for-profit business owner aren't able to rely on grants to start your business. Any questions about the typical sources of startup funds? All right. When the bank or any traditional lender takes a look at your loan application, they have to look at it and understand that there is some risk with the number of small business failures there are. Since there is such a high number of small businesses that fail, banks are very, very cautious when they are considering a small business loan. So the loan application requirements, they differ and vary lender to lender. And those requirements also will differ if you are buying a business or if you're purchasing a business or starting up a new venture. But when you are working with the bank, the lender is going to take a look at your personal financial statement, the tax returns for you as the owner. The lender is also going to take a brief look at the business plan. They're going to do a credit check on you. And when they look at the business plan, I'll be honest and say that they're really going to look at the executive summary, which is kind of the summary of the entire plan. And they're going to dive right into those pro forma balance sheets, the income statement projections, as well as the cash flow statement projections. And the reason why is because they have their own software and tools at the bank that they use to calculate risk of a project. And they can base that off of your industry, what you're doing, and several different other factors that aren't necessarily just related to the business plan. So they're going to look at the business plan to make sure you have one and that it looks professional and feasible, but they're really going to take a look at the financials in that plan, your personal financial background, and the detailing of how much you are looking for in funding and how it's going to be used. So even if you have excellent credit, you can't go into the bank and say, I need $500,000 for my website. So they are going to obviously take a look at what you're saying you're using the funds for. If you're saying you're purchasing equipment, you'll want to have documentation of the items that you're going to be purchasing. But every different lender has a different application process. One of the things we do at the SBDC is kind of guide you through a loan application process with the bank. We don't actually work with the banks directly, but we prepare you and get you bank ready. And many of you all may have seen the 5 C's of credit, but just a recap of kind of what those 5 C's are and how they're relevant to the lender. And even though each lender has their own process for evaluating a loan request, all of the lenders are going to address the 5 C's of credit and address these elements here that you see. Number one, they want to see how much cash the owner has, meaning what is your equity contribution as the owner? There are a lot of different factors involved, but the expectation typically is that you're going to contribute 20 to 25% of the total funds that are needed to start your business. Now, one of the benefits of an SBA small business loan versus a typical regular small business loan is that the SBA, you can get as low as a 10% equity injection on some loans. So you're not always having to put up that 20 or 25% of that loan amount. And obviously that will vary from lender to lender. The next thing, the next C of credit is capacity. A lender wants to know and understand and trust that the business has the ability to cover all of the expenses that it will have from the sale of its product or services. So those 4 demographic questions that we talked about to better understand your customers, who they are, how many, how much, and how often, answering those questions in a detailed fashion is going to give you all of the data to project what your capacity is. So lenders don't expect you to be profitable from day one. They do not expect that. But your research in the business plan and those financial projections will help demonstrate that you have the necessary capacity that's needed to repay their investment, or to repay that loan, excuse me. So the loan request that you provide should show that the funds you are requesting will provide the needed cash until you become profitable. The third C is collateral. If you can't pay back the loan, which happens, collateral is anything that you have pledged to the bank so that they can get their depositors' money back. Inventory, if you put that up for collateral, and other business assets that you may have, if you had a car under the business name or you bought a building with your business, they will not be valued at the cost that you paid, but at a much lower value. So keep that in consideration when you're thinking about how much collateral you have. Collateral typically is going to be those things that you personally own. Then the 4th C of credit are the conditions. There's 2 factors in that conditions term. The first factor includes the economic conditions in the area. So what are the conditions outside or externally to the business that could have a potential impact? The second factor in terms of conditions is the actual conditions of the loan that they would be able to provide you as a lender. So the second factor of conditions includes what the interest rate of that loan is going to be and what the term is. So most business loans that you get are going to have a term of between, let's say, 5 to 7 years. If you are purchasing real estate, you typically, if you get an SBA loan, you get about 30 years to pay. But lenders, if you have assets and you're buying equipment, you're typically not going to get a payback period that's actually longer than the time that your assets will actually hold value. So when you're thinking about conditions, make sure that you have a good understanding of the conditions of that loan as well. What are the terms? What is the interest rate? And make sure that you have make sure that you're settling with the lender that's giving you the best rate as well. And then finally, the 5th C of credit is character. And we even have on the slide here, we add a little bit to it. That includes the knowledge, the skills, the abilities that you have as that business owner. And this also includes your personal history of how you handle money, including your credit score. And lenders will also want to understand if you have a knowledge of that product or service that you're selling, along with some of that business experience. So background checks are also done as a part of a loan request with the bank. But these kind of are the 5 C's that the lender looks at in detail when evaluating your loan. Any questions about the funding of the plan, the different funding sources, or any questions about lending or anything like that before we go into the legal structure? All righty. So there are a number of considerations that should be taken when you are considering a legal structure. And the first consideration is the risk of being sued. The second consideration is how simple that business model or legal structure is, how simple it is in order to reduce time and cost for you. And then the third consideration when you're selecting a legal structure for your business is always going to be the tax implications. So because of liability and tax implications, there's no decision on your business structure should be taken without doing a high level of research. But the legal structure that you select typically is going to affect your liability, your taxation, and your accounting. So we're going to kind of dive into these different legal structures, but the resource guides that I have for you all available will kind of give a little bit more background and have a little bit more of a discussion on the advantages and disadvantages of each different type. So the sole proprietorship, if any of you all have not already registered your business formally, either as an LLC or a corporation, congratulations, you all already right now are sole proprietors. So the sole proprietorship is the most common form of business here in the United States, and it's run by either an individual or a married couple. The benefits of a sole proprietorship are that the owner receives all profits. Since there's only one owner, all the profits come to you. Since the sole proprietorship is not recognized as a formal legal entity, profits are only going to be taxed one time as ordinary income. So all of the income received by a sole proprietorship is just incorporated into your personal tax returns. Okay, so you still have to pay taxes on that profit, but it's in your bracket and at your personal tax level. Since you're the sole owner, you get to make all of the decisions. You're free to operate as you choose within the legal limits of your state and local municipality, and all of the decisions and responsibility is on you. So that's a great benefit, and we talked about some of the reasons why we want to start a small business, and one of them is to be able to make our own decisions. There's also very, very low or no organizational costs because since it's not a formal legal entity, there isn't any registration cost for organizing. One thing you may have to purchase if you are a sole proprietorship and you want to use a name that's not your actual name is you may have to spend about $10 to purchase a fictitious name, but typically there's no real cost to starting a sole proprietorship. And obviously they are very simple to organize because there's really nothing to organize other than to say, I'm doing business as me. Now, with all of that simplicity, we see the lovely baby here. He's happy. He's making all of these decisions. Yes, any business needs to collect sales tax if they are selling a product here in the state of Missouri, Ashley. So great question. Yes, they would be required to also collect sales tax. But don't worry if you have it. You're okay. But that baby can turn into this gentleman here with the face I had when I woke up yesterday morning running behind. There's a lot of disadvantages to the sole proprietorship because of the simplicity that it has. So the number one disadvantage is it doesn't provide, having a sole proprietorship or just doing business as you does not provide you any separate legal status or protection or separation from the business owner. So when you're a sole proprietor, you are the business. There's no separation, there's no separate identity, and that leads to unlimited liability for you as the business owner. And that's going to be the most important disadvantage, is that unlimited liability that you have. So since there is no separate legal status for the company, you as the owner are personally responsible for all obligations, any debts, liabilities that the business may incur. So this means that if something happens and if you're selling food out of your home and then someone gets sick from the food, or if you sell a bicycle that you design yourself and you don't have any separate legal status, someone gets injured, sued, you go to court, they win that judgment, and then your personal assets could be lost due to a judgment against the business. There's not really much insurance for a sole proprietor because nobody wants to insure something that doesn't have a legal status, okay? So a sole proprietorship, you can really see that it's just the starting phase for anyone who's ever done a hand-to-hand transaction is technically really a sole proprietor. Another limitation of the sole proprietorship is the limited ability to raise funds. Generally, you're not going to be able to go and get a traditional bank loan. You're probably not also going to be able to get a grant from any reputable organization. So you're typically relying on your financial assets as the owner, or your ability to make money or raise money needed to do any expansions to the business. So nothing wrong with starting as a sole proprietor, but very, very risky as you start to actually do business, okay? Limited liability company is one of the more popular forms of legal status here in the state. Well, I'd say probably the most popular. And there are several reasons for that, several different advantages to the LLC. LLC is actually one of the more fairly newer types of legal status here in the United States. And it kind of combines the advantages of the sole proprietorship to the advantages of a corporation as well. So the limited liability company provides just that, limited liability. The LLC is a separate legal entity. So generally, when you think about owners, when you hear that term owners, when you think about an LLC, an owner is actually called a member, okay? So generally, members of an LLC are only responsible for the debts up to the dollar amount of their investment. So setting up an LLC is very, very simple, and I'll kind of get into that here in just a second, but the number one benefit of that LLC is that it provides separation and a veil between you and your company. So LLCs can have an unlimited amount of members or owners, and it's as simple as creating something called an operating agreement to add in additional members or remove additional members from an LLC. So it's a lot more simple to manage these types of companies. And the other huge advantage is the tax implications. A lot of times I have clients who ask me, well, I want to register my business, but I don't want anything to change with my taxes yet until I'm really ready to commit. When you register an LLC, nothing changes with your tax situation. It is also seen as a pass-through organization to you. So since it's a pass-through to you, it's still just going to be taxed at your personal income level, and it's just added to your personal tax return. There's not going to be a separate tax return for the company. You're taxed at your level, and it just becomes an additional Schedule C that's included on your personal tax return. So nothing changes with your tax ramifications. You can have an unlimited number of owners attached, and you are able to raise capital a lot more easy than with the sole proprietorship because you're able to go out and go out and seek traditional lending as well. So those are some of the benefits, and there are just a few disadvantages, but to me, there's not really many disadvantages, to be honest with you. So LLCs, they say on the slide, can be costly to form. In reality, so the LLC cost on the Secretary of State website is $50 plus a $1.25 convenience fee. This is something that I run my clients through all the time, being that I work with a lot of our startup clients. So this is something that you pay for directly to the Secretary of State for your registration. There is no cost for you to register and get a employer identification number, which we'll talk about in just a few slides. But overall, your cost of a limited liability company will be about $50 if you are just a single member LLC. Obviously, a sole proprietorship is nothing, but what's $50 to protect yourself and your business? LLCs also, LLCs cannot have investors or stock. So anyone investing in the business actually typically becomes a partner. And those partners have a lot more responsibility than someone who's just a stockholder if they have a corporation. And then a LLC does have personal tax liability. Since it is typically a pass-through entity, that tax liability does come up and reflect on your personal taxes. So if your LLC has reported revenue for that year, it just goes into the Schedule C and then goes and attaches to your personal tax return. So overall, the LLC for most single owner small businesses is consistently the most attractive type of legal structure. And we're going to talk about now the C corporation, which is the next most popular type of small business that's an actual legal entity. And there is a lot of disadvantages if you are a small business in terms of going into a corporation. But starting off with the advantages of a corporation, a C Corp specifically, there is extremely limited liability for you as the business owner, because liability is also limited in this case to the loss of your shareholder investment. So if you're the only shareholder, which wouldn't, and that's the thing, small businesses, it's usually, if it's not just you, you may have one or two partners. That's why the C corporation gets a little bit complicated for you as a small business owner. But you have, if you do own a C corporation or have extremely limited liability. So your personal assets, just like the LLC, will not be on the hook if something happens to the company, if there's a negative judgment against the company. You can transfer ownership very, very easily by just selling stock. You can also raise capital very, very easily through the sale of stock or by putting more stock out there on the market. And then you also can pay your employee company paid fringe benefits. So fringe benefits can be deducted or can be deducted from taxes. Health insurance is an example. Obviously, there are going to be some limitations with that. And typically, if you have a corporation, you'll probably be working with your attorney and an accountant as well to understand exactly what type of benefits and things can be paid out. So unlike other structures, unlike the other legal structures of business, there is one big disadvantage of the C corporation, and that is going to be the double taxation. The profits of your C Corp corporation are going to always be taxed twice. So firstly, a C corporation must file a tax return each year to pay the tax on the corporation's income, so that corporate tax. And then any profits left after taxes must be paid to stockholders as well in the form of dividends. So if you were the owner or quote unquote a stockholder of that C corporation, you then are also going to pay tax on the dividends that you receive or the profits from that company as well. So the double taxation becomes a real big problem for many startup owners, which is why the corporation is typically not very attractive unless you plan to have employees in that near future or several different business locations. Also, C corporations are a little bit more costly to form. Unlike the LLC, which is $50 one time until you choose to pay and dissolve that LLC, The C corporation requires that there are annual filing fees and annual filing duties that are obligations that are met. There are corporate formalities such as holding regular board meetings for directors and stockholder meetings. You have to also do an annual election of officers. And so these obligations, as well as the cost of forming and incorporating in those annual filing fees, can make the C corporation just a very, very costly, unnecessary way of doing business for a lot of startup small business owners. Now, let's say your business, you know you don't need a C corporation now, but eventually you can see yourself having 150, 200 employees, having different locations across the country. At that point, you can elect another legal structure and then become a C corp later if necessary. You can change your legal structure to that C corporation at a later time. What is in a name? There are a lot of different components to thinking of and deciding on a business name. But one thing we want to note here is the use of a DBA or a fictitious name. When you're thinking about naming your business, I know that there's a lot that goes into deciding a name. We want something that's visibly appealing, not too long, that's something that someone can pronounce and read easily. And that's very, very true. But sometimes companies decide to come up with a very, very generic name. So let's say my LLC would be named Amina Abdul Malik LLC. That doesn't sound fun. You don't want to use that in your marketing purposes, but you wanted that as your legal business name. When that is the case, you can come up with and create and register something called a DBA or a fictitious name. And that is not the same as the name that you registered with the Secretary of State. And this is a name that you can also use within all of your marketing and operational purposes that is owned by your business, if that makes sense. So if my LLC's name was Amina Abdul Malik, I could then register a DBA called Amina Lawn Care Services, Amina this, or whatever I would want to actually use in practice. The DBAs or the fictitious names cost $7, still with that $1.25 convenience fee on the Secretary of State website. And from there, once you own that fictitious name, if John was doing business as John's Lemonade Stand, he would register John's Lemonade Stand as a DBA, even though his registered LLC name is Missouri Lemonade Manufacturing. So the DBAs allow you to protect your privacy. They can add value to your business if you find a catchy name. So if you find something that you want to use for marketing purposes that's catchy, it can add value. It also provides you flexibility because when state law requires your business to operate under a name that's distinguishable to avoid confusion, but your business name may not be available in states where you would like to necessarily expand. So registering a fictitious name also can solve this problem by allowing expansion into those other markets where the legal name of your business is already being used. And I see a question here. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly again. Is it Nogaline? I may not be pronouncing that correctly, but you asked, does your domain have to be your DBA? Your domain does not have to be your DBA. You do want to do some research to make sure that your domain is not someone else's business name, but your domain does not have to be your DBA. No, it does not. Now, the DBA also can give your business a little bit of versatility. Keep in mind, though, you don't have to have a DBA. Most of the LLCs I registered, I don't register DBAs immediately, but there are some cases where clients do want to have a fictitious name or DBA. One other thing to note here about the name, the DBA doesn't provide you any legal protection, so to speak. So it's not, that's why it's not necessarily, it doesn't matter if your domain is your DBA or not, because having a DBA doesn't necessarily legally protect you like a trademark or a copyright does in that regard. It just allows you to use another name that you don't have registered directly for your business. If you have a name for your company's LLC or the business itself, not a DBA, that you think may be taken or that someone is watching or you're competing to get to market first, you can reserve a corporate name. And I believe that reservation, yes, with the Secretary of State, when you reserve a corporate name for your business, for your LLC, it will be reserved for 180 days. And the thing with that is, I will say that typically you don't have to reserve your name in advance, but if you are competing and it's one of those things where you know that someone else is looking for that name, you can reserve it. But most of the time when I work with clients, we're not reserving the corporate name ahead of time. We're just going through the LLC registration together all at once. Step 6, are there any questions about step 5 and everything we just talked about regarding the name and the different legal structures of business? The moral of the story with legal structures is that typically LLCs are going to be the way to go. That's something I can definitely also assist you all with, is getting your LLCs registered and getting your operating agreement set up and even your federal EIN numbers as well. So the remaining steps of the presentation today all are about getting legal. So when we talk about business registration, sole proprietorship, and even if you're just a general partnership, which is basically the same thing as a sole proprietor with 2 or more people, you do not have to file anything with the state to start your business, as I stated before. You do have to register your fictitious name or DBA with the Secretary of State if you're using anything other than your own legal name. If you have a limited liability company or a limited liability company, the articles of organization are, like I said, $50. Now, please, please, please do not go to the Secretary of State's office. Do not fill out the paper form. If you go to fill out the paper articles of organization, which is a very simple form, the fee is $105. If you do it online on the Secretary of State's website, it is only $50. So please save yourself that $55 and do your registration online. And that's, like I said, is something that I love to assist with, is that registration. Now, if you are wanting to register a limited liability partnership, which we didn't really talk about too much, anytime you are registering something with one or more partners involved, you want to get a lawyer involved. You want an attorney to help you draw out your operating agreement. The operating agreement dictates and describes the nature of ownership for the company and operations. So you want to work with a lawyer, some type of attorney, if you are starting up a limited liability partnership. And then corporations actually have to also do several different, types of registration with the state. And the fees for your corporation registration, are actually going to be based on the amount of authorized capital that the business has. So that's why corporations also can get very taxly when it comes to registration costs. And then also, on top of what you're going to file to register your corporation on the state level, you have to also file some specific forms with the IRS to also have that dictation as well. So main thing to note here, if you're going into business with another person, you definitely want to sign some type of partnership or operating agreement to make sure all of those roles and governance is clear. And if you're starting any type of corporation, you definitely are also going to want to work with an attorney to make sure that you are filing all of that paperwork correctly. If you have a certain profession that requires additional registration, there are some of these that include doctors. If you're a CPA, so a public accountant, a barber, a massage therapist, there are also certain different types of additional state registration you'll need from the Division of Professional Registration. And that's something we can talk about as well after class, and I can get you some more information on if that is the case. I didn't see any special cases when we introduced ourselves in the chat, but yeah, so there are some special cases that you'll need additional professional registration paperwork for as well. And there's also more information about this in the resource guide that I'll be sending out. All right, we're kind of wrapping it up here. The last few steps, taking care of taxes. And this is also another area where it's highly, highly advisable to seek assistance in this area. Obviously, I'm not a tax expert, although I know a lot of information in this realm. Please, please, please make sure you're getting reputable information and preparing yourself for the tax ramifications of small business ownership. On a federal level, you as a business owner typically are going to get a federal EIN number. This number is just like it's kind of like the Social Security number for your business. And this is the number that's going to be used to identify your business to the federal government, especially the IRS. Now, in reality, when you go and when I assist you with registering and getting an EIN number for your LLC, the website is going to say that you don't need an EIN if you are a single member LLC. That's because the EIN is really used to manage employees and from an IRS perspective, but the EIN is very, very instrumental in building relationships with suppliers. You can use your EIN instead of your Social Security number in some cases when you're applying for things for your business. And it is the way that the government can identify you. So even if you are a single member LLC, you still are recommended to get that EIN number. Income tax must be estimated and paid quarterly, and that is if the individual expects to owe tax of $1,000 or more when their return is filed at the end of the year. So this has beat me up in the past with my own consulting LLC. When I first started, I knew that I needed to put up my self-employment taxes and estimate what I was making and pay those quarterly, and I did not. And at the end of the year, I had a humongous tax bill, which I was a little bit prepared for, but still. So you want to make sure that with all of the self-employment work you're doing, you are adequately accounting for any of that income tax that you are going to owe based on your income. Now, self-employment taxes are actually required under FICA, which is the Federal Insurance Contributions Act. And so FICA tax actually funds Social Security and Medicare. So when you work for someone else, and this percentage has changed, but it was about 7.65% of your taxable income went to cover FICA. Your employer matched that contribution. So now, since you're self-employed, you must pay both those employee and employer contributions to that FICA. So when you're self-employed, you want to make sure that you are aware of the different taxes that are out there and where you should be and how you should be paying, how often you should be paying those taxes. Now, if you plan to have employees, that's where it gets a little bit funky. Employers must withhold and remit federal employment taxes for employees. These payroll taxes typically include all those things we've seen on our paychecks before, include that Social Security, that Medicare, and federal unemployment. So you as an employer, if you do end up having employees, you're going to have to collect and withhold and remit those taxes as well, which is why we talk about independent contractors here in the state of Missouri, but an independent contractor saves you a lot of money as a business owner, but you do have to be careful about who you say an independent contractor is. An independent contractor is someone who typically has a lot more autonomy in the work they do and work on a project and contract basis versus an employee typically does the same or similar duties every day directly underneath your control. There's actually a list of how to determine if your worker is an employee or an independent contractor. But what I will say and recommend is that as you're starting off, that you shy away from employees and try to use independent contractors as much as it's feasible. But obviously, if you're starting a bakery, that's a brick and mortar operation, that's a case where you're immediately going to have employees, not independent contractors. And then also, after you take care of your business on a federal level in terms of taxes and registration, you have to concern yourself with what is required here in the state of Missouri. Anyone who sells tangible goods, who hires employees, and if you're a C corporation, you have to register with the Department of Revenue. And so, Ashley, you asked that question about, excuse me, do sole proprietors have to collect sales tax? Yes. Anyone who sells tangible goods here has to obtain a Missouri identification number. Now, the good thing is that back in the day, a few years ago, when you registered to get your Missouri tax ID number, or they call it the Missouri identification number, and now that's simplified it because you get the tax ID, the retail sales tax license, and everything from that Missouri ID number, which is great now. But before that, you used to have to pay a bond in order to get that retail sales tax license and Missouri ID number based on your projected monthly sales. Now there is no bond for that. And so a lot of my clients are like, gosh, if I would have waited another few months, I wouldn't have to pay that bond. But now you go through, when you say reselling, explain to me tell me a little bit more detail about that. I see a comment in the chat that asks about reselling. Explain to me a little bit more about the nature of how you're reselling. But now you register online for that Missouri ID number. In a couple of weeks, hopefully, when everything is moving smoothly down there at Jeff City, you receive a packet of information to your address with all the information you need to start collecting sales tax. It gives your sales tax percentage and all that information for how to remit, withhold, and then submit back to the state. What typically with local taxes, the best practice is to contact the city or county or the municipality that you will both be doing business in, and also where the business will be physically located. Each municipality, each city and county is different. We have some of the more strenuous counties to do business in, University City, Chesterfield, and then you have other places like unincorporated St. Louis County where there may not be any rhyme or reason. So the best practice before you start doing business in these areas is to contact the county or city clerk directly and get that information about what specific business licensing is needed. Typically, the state, if you're doing business in the city of St. Louis, there is a business license that you need. It's called the GBL, or Graduated Business License. And then every different county has different rules for how much you have to pay or what licensing is needed to do business there in their city or county. So talking about covering yourself really quickly, we can't forget to do this. We've talked all today, this morning, really about the different ways and everything, all of this planning that you'll be doing is helping cover yourself. We talked a little bit about employees already and the ramifications of having employees, but you as an employer must pay both the federal and state unemployment taxes. Those taxes fund the employment insurance program. You're also going to have to contribute and withhold for FICA, unemployment taxes. If your business has 5 or more employees, or if it's a construction-related business, you also have to collect workers' compensation. And then we talked about the importance or the benefits of having independent contractors. Okay. Now, as I stated, the Missouri Department of Labor has a whole checklist on how to determine if that worker is an independent contractor or employee. But Missouri is one of the more flexible states in terms of the use of independent contractors. A lot of people here are independent contractors. So lean into that as you start to think about how your business will be organized operationally. Okay, and you said that your store sources used clothing, vintage, and resell them. And see, that's kind of always murky waters, but typically we say that even though your business is located primarily online, but you sell to people, I'm assuming to across the country, I'm assuming, I would still say that you most likely are supposed to be collecting that sales tax. But that's something also that I would love to speak with you after class about, kind of get a little bit more information about how you're selling, who you're selling to, and then we would make that determination. But my mother also owns a similar type of company, and we found that she does need to collect that sales tax no matter if she is reselling the product. Business insurance. Insurance is another important potential issue for business owners. But to be honest with you all, I don't want you all to concern yourself that much about insurance unless you are providing a product or something that is handled. Typically, you don't have a heavy requirement for insurance by law, but it all depends on what your business is. If you are a business consultant, there's not a lot of insurance that you're going to need to carry versus if you're starting a home healthcare company. Okay, so there's so many different types of business insurance, but the best practice with this is to first think about what needs to be insured. Where are those areas of risk within your business? Okay, so you want to categorize the risk within your business and then analyze within those different risk areas what potentially needs to be insured. I always recommend working with an insurance broker, an insurance agent, excuse me. I do have some recommendations for those that you can kind of get more information or quotes from. But generally, from a base perspective, if it's just you owning that business and you're a small business owner, just start by thinking of the different risk areas and figure out if there is anything that needs to be insured. So you want to think about what events could potentially force you out of business, or what type of loss could cause you a very, very serious hardship, and what amount of loss could or couldn't be handled from the income that you already have. So best practice is to work with a professional when finding insurance, and also just using your common sense about what might need to be insured. We had a question earlier, or someone mentioned intellectual property and, their trademarks. And intellectual property, we know, is a specialized form of law that protects creators like yourselves from having their work used by others without permission. And this has gotten a lot of businesses into a lot of big trouble. So in simple terms, you can violate intellectual property without even meaning to, but you first want to consider what intellectual property your business might have, and then figure out what needs to be protected based on that. So trademarks or brand names, they typically indicate a commercial source and maybe words, logos, or sounds, or any other symbols that indicate something comes from a particular company. We have the copyright, which also protects creations such as a work of a writer, an artist, an illustrator. Those type of materials can be copyrighted. And then we also have patents. Patents apply to inventions typically. Those are going to be acquired by businesses that are trying to protect a new product, components of that product, technology, or something similar. Please, when you think about patents, patent searching is very, very complex. You can do your own patent search, and that's something I think that the library may have resources for. I'm not exactly sure about that. Eleanor will confirm that for me. But you can start by doing your own patent search, but if you're really creating a product or a component that needs to be patented, you'll definitely want to work with professionals that is in the area of patents, because many times only the part of a product is patented, so it makes it hard for you to search, and there's different platforms to search for these things on. So developing a patent can be very, very complex, and it can take some time. Trade secrets don't have any formal protections. They're similar to copyrights and patents, but trade secrets protect those items where the public release of those items would be detrimental to the creator. So the spices of KFC chicken or the formula for Coca-Cola are all trade secrets. We do not typically directly walk you through going through creating a trademark, a patent, or a copyright. I have assisted clients with that type of work before, but we're always going to also refer you to some type of IP attorney or someone who has professional experience with dealing with intellectual property, okay? And also your regular business attorney, if you end up getting one of those and have those, will also be able to kind of help you in that direction with intellectual property as well. And I just talked about one important member of something that we call at the SBDC your bail team. So obviously we know that you as the business owner are responsible for everything that your business does or fails to do, but you can't have, or you may not have expertise in all areas. You need a team around you to support and help you. And at minimum, you want to figure out who your bail team is. The bail team are all of those individuals who will provide you advice in their area of expertise, but you as the business owner still will be the one to make that final decision. Sometimes you'll get conflicting advice and you'll have to make choices. For example, your bail team includes an accountant and a banker. An accountant and a banker can look at a financial situation completely differently and give you two different options. An accountant's responsibility is to always try to lower your tax obligation. To do that, sometimes they may be looking for ways to reduce your profit. However, when a banker or an investor looks at a business, they want to see as large of a profit as possible. So it's up to you in these cases to use all of your support network, your bail team, your mentor, your business counselor, someone who is helping you with contracting, or any of your other support to make those decisions. We talked already about different licensing. Similarly to insurance, the best practice here is to contact the city or county, like I stated before, that you are doing business in and that your business is located in, to get an understanding of what license requirements there are. There could also be federal requirements if you are selling a certain type of product. If for product safety, there are certain types of licenses and environmental licenses. The state of Missouri has its own requirements if you're selling liquor, tobacco, doing something directly related to the environment. And even on the federal level, there could also be additional licensing based on the specific industry you're going into. But what I will mainly say here is when it comes to the city and county and that local licensing, do not just base your information off of what you think you know. Contact those city and county representatives directly. Because sometimes I've had a client where this happened, where they were told one piece of information based on the county that they lived in, and they thought that that information applied to the neighboring county that they were doing business in as well, and it did not. And they ended up getting into a little bit of trouble with doing business in that neighboring county. So you want to make sure that you have all the information up front. We keep talking about it. Prior planning. So we're almost done here. Almost done. I know I said an hour and a half, we're really rounding it out at the 2. But the main things that you can start off with after you have kind of completed your plan, handled all of your registration needs, is signing up and getting a business bank account. You don't want to use your personal bank account for business. I know we've all heard stories about commingling of funds. But not only does commingling funds complicate your business's financial management and make it hard for you to really understand how your business is performing, it also can void any of those liability protections that you have afforded to you by having an LLC. So starting off, you probably, depending on if you're selling a bunch of products, or if you have employees, you may only need one account to get started with. I typically recommend starting your business bank account with a credit union or a smaller bank, because the credit unions typically have a lot more flexible fee structures, or no fees for their basic checking and savings accounts. And overall, they're much more feasible for those startup businesses. sometimes with Bank of America, U.S. Bank, there are a lot of fees involved with their basic bank accounts. Also, on top of having a business bank account set up, you want to make sure you adapt an accounting system. So there are several different options available: QuickBooks, Peachtree, even just something as simple as using Excel to notate how much you're spending and how much you're spending and how much you're making. But you need to adapt some type of formal system to keep up and manage your business's finances. Otherwise, you'll never really understand how your business is actually performing. Having a CPA is good. You don't need to be meeting with your CPA extremely frequently, but you want to have a person that is available there when the end of tax season comes to help you run through some of that accounting as well. Because QuickBooks will have all that data, but having a professional to also speak with to provide that data to is going to be kind of the next step with that. Whatever system you select, you want to use that system to track all of the business's income and expenses. So trying to keep track of all that spending you do. QuickBooks makes it easy because you could take pictures of receipts and it automatically input that data into your expenses. But everything that your system does, you want to try to track all of those expenses, all of that income, and even any inventory if you have any. Monitoring inventory is very, very important for those product-based businesses because you don't want to be sitting on too much inventory. You want to understand how much inventory is the best to buy so that your cash flow is as efficient as possible. And then finally, I'm going to leave you here with just a question for you all. What is going to keep your business going? Is it going to be the selling of your products, the manufacturing of your products, accepting payments, or managing cash flow? But what are those critical functions of your business going to be? What is that value? What is going to keep that business going? And then from there, I will take any questions from anyone in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourselves. And thank you all so much for joining me. One thing I will quickly change my screen share to also is the resource guide that I will be sending you all. Let me zoom this in a little bit. So it's actually 53 pages, I apologize. But the reference guide, like I stated, will kind of walk you through. We talked about a lot of this information as well in here. The business model canvas is actually in here, and it kind of guides you through all the information you need to know, gives you links to the different websites to actually do a lot of this registration as well. And so this should be a very, very helpful guide to you all as you all are taking the next steps to starting your business. And thank you all so much. Oh, thank you, Ashley, for joining us, and Sal, Cecily. And I guess if there are no questions, Eleanor, I will turn it back over to you.
Well, fantastic. Thank you, Amina, and thank you everyone for joining us. As Amina was saying, you'll be getting an email from her with that resource guide. You'll also be getting another email from me with a link to the recording of this program, as well as information about our upcoming programs. In July, just a teaser, we'll be talking about QuickBooks, but we're also going to have some plans for August and September. So I'll get that to you when we have them. We hope that you're interested, and I would also love to hear if there's anything that we're not providing that you would like a program on, or if you have any questions. We'd be both happy to hear from you. By email, you can call me, you can even come into the library now. We're still doing our programs as webinars for the time being, and eventually that will change, but I don't know when. But the libraries are open, and they're a great, peaceful place to work, do some printing, learn about some resources. Amina mentioned patents, and yes, patent searching is quite an impressive chore. But I have helped people figure out the process of copyrights, trademarks, and patents. That's in order from easiest to hardest. And so I am not a lawyer, so there are some questions that I can't answer, but there are some questions that I can. And I can definitely get you started on the intellectual property journey And eventually you might want to switch over to a lawyer, but I can definitely get you started. So thanks again and have a great day.